Welcome to Health Club with Julia. I'm your host, health coach, and registered dietitian, Julia Campagna. I'm on a mission to bridge the gap between looking your best and living your life to the fullest. After years of over dieting, struggling with disordered eating, and destroying my social life, I finally found how to reach my dream physique without sacrificing the things I love. Now I'm sharing all my strategies and education with you. We'll be talking all things health, including hormones, metabolism, and lifestyle to help you cut out the confusion and start living. So get cozy and join the club. Hello, you guys. Welcome back to another episode of the Health Club with Julia podcast. As always, so happy you are here. Today is going to be an in-depth conversation about hypothalamic amenorrhea and fertility. I want to talk about this. I have my own experience with this, and it could be scary. So let's open up. Let's be a little bit vulnerable in this episode, starting off with my own experience, and then I want to kind of go into, what actually is it, what is causing this for you, and how to then regain your period to improve your fertility and have a better chance of having kids if that's your goal. So I am somebody who has had hypothalamic amenorrhea in my past. I remember the day so vividly. I will never forget it. So basically, when I had it was when I was at my all-time low in my ED era, and I did not know how bad it had gotten until I went to this doctor visit, and they told me that I had hypothalamic amenorrhea. So let's take you back a little bit of ways. So I did have an ED back in 2016. Really kind of started late 2015, but progressed in 2016. And I was like, no, I'm fine. My friends had interventions with me where they all sat me down. I was in college at the time, so they all sat me down in a circle. I remember these times so vividly as well. And they would say, we're worried about you. Are you okay? What's going on? I was very distant with them as well, which was not like me. And I was just not in a really good place, and I'd be like, no guys, I'm fine. I'm totally fine. Everything's cool. Don't worry about it. My mother and sisters also my family in general was also very worried about me at the time. I was in college, so I didn't really see them that often because I was away, but I would send, my mom some pictures of myself, and I remember her after the fact, after I was healing and all of that, she had told me there were quite a few times that I would send her pictures and she would just sob and cry and felt so helpless. And anytime I went home for break, and now this happened over the course of winter break, which wasn't that bad, and then all of spring. So when I went back home after my spring semester, so into summer break, was when it was really bad. And yeah, so she hadn't seen me for months, and when I came home from summer break, she immediately started crying when she saw me, and I was like, no, I'm fine. And again, it wasn't until and again, I vividly remember this time. I came home for summer break and I was like, I'm all good, everything's fine, yada yada yada. And I actually don't even think it was summer break. I think it was spring break, or not quite summer break, but I think it was after spring break when I went home. I was close to home, even in college, so I could go home really whenever I wanted to. So I went home for whatever reason, and I thought everything was fine. And I remember my mom crying, and I was having this conversation back and forth, oh, I didn't lose that much weight, I'm totally fine. And then I went and I stepped on the scale and I was like, oh shit, okay. I was way lighter than I thought that I was. And it's tough because when you're in that space, you don't realize how bad it is until you pull yourself out of that spot. I didn't realize how bad it was when I was in it until I saw that number on the scale and I was like, oh crap, maybe she's right. So then I went back into my mom's room and I was like, okay, Mom, I think you are right. And I literally told her I agree, I think some things need to change here. And so fast forward, I had a doctor's appointment. I was telling her everything that was going on. I also had no period for a significant amount of time at this point. It was definitely several months, if not a year. I don't remember exactly how long I had a missing period for, but I was explaining this all to the doctor, whatever. Then I got told, you have hypothalamic amenorrhea, and I was like, sick, okay, what is that? I had no idea at the time, and I was sitting there, she was explaining to me what it was, and I was like, oh my god, and she said the words, if you ever want to have kids in your future, you need to make changes now. And light bulb, ding dong, alert, the whole thing, it went off in my head, and I was like, holy shit, this is not good. This is real, this is not good. I need to make some changes. Of course I wanted to have kids in the future. So hearing that, I was so scared. I was like, oh my god, what does this mean for me? Like, have I messed it all up? I was just very nervous. I was very scared. So that was when I kind of made all the changes that I made, that I'll talk about more in here as I explain further what it is and how to kind of regain your cycle back, etc. But yeah, I remember that being a really hard time in my life, and that like quote, if you ever want to have kids in your future and you make changes now, that like quote has stuck with me still to this day. Like, it's now been 8 years since then, and I still, like, I remember that moment so vividly because I was so scared and so shocked and like, oh my god, what did I do to myself, pretty much. And it's very scary. And so I feel for anybody who does have a missing cycle. I feel for you. Whoever is listening to this and has been told they have hypothalamic amenorrhea, I feel for you. I know what it feels like, and it is scary. And you might feel helpless, and you might feel like there's no way out, but there is, and it can definitely be reversed. That's the good thing about hypothalamic amenorrhea. Majority of the time, that can be reversed, and it can go away. So it's not something that really sticks with you for life. As long as you make proper changes, you can get rid of it, and you can become, more fertile again, have your regular cycle again. Doesn't mean that once you have it for good. So that is the good news about it. So that's kind of my experience with it, and how I realized I had it, the whole 9 yards there. Now, I want to kind of explain this a little bit further for those who are listening who either don't know what it is, or if you have been told you have it, how can you manage that? How can you improve that? And then obviously get rid of that. So starting off with, what is hypothalamic amenorrhea? This is when your body is basically too stressed to support regular reproductive function. So think of it this way. When nothing's going on, when we're not stressed, our body generally runs very well. If you have very good health, you have no issues, you function very optimally, right? So everything is like in tune, you have good digestion, good reproductive health, good thyroid health, the whole, like, everything's fine. When you get really stressed, and I don't mean like, oh, I'm stressed today, I mean chronic stress, where you are stressed all the time, very overwhelmed, it's debilitating stress, and you can't get out of fight or flight mode, systems start to slow down. If I always like to use the analogy of like our ancestors when we were cavemen, right? So back in the caveman era, I think our biggest stresses were being hunted by predators and also getting food in our system. So when we are so stressed, your body is like trying to get out of that situation. Think of a caveman trying to escape being eaten by some animal back in the day, right? We're not thinking like, oh, let's ovulate today. We're thinking, get me the fuck out of the situation. It predates back to then, right? So we have this stress mechanism that we were all born with, that is innate in humans. We have had that forever. And it is, in simple terms, fight or flight. If we are stressed, we're in this fight or flight mode, and we got to get out of this stressful situation. So if you're chronically stressed all the freaking time and you are always in fight or flight mode, your body is always thinking, let me get out of this stressful situation. It's not thinking, hey, let's make a baby. It's not thinking about that at all. So certain functions start to slow down and down-regulate when you have chronic stress. One of those being a reproductive function. Also, things like digestion slows down. There's different functions, like I said, that slow down. But main one here that I want to point out is our regular reproductive function can slow down if we are chronically stressed. So that is, hopefully helps you understand that a little bit more. But basically, in simple terms, what this means is you will lose your period because you're under too much stress. Your body is not having regular reproductive function. So you will lose your period, and when you don't have your period, you're not ovulating. And when you're not ovulating, therefore you can't really get pregnant. So it's a whole cycle going on. It all is connected to one another. But basically, hypothalamic amenorrhea goes hand in hand with infertility. And that's a problem, especially if that is your goal in life, is to eventually have kids. That is a big problem. So that is pretty much what it is. It's just your brain, HPA axis, all the things. Not going to go too far into that, but your brain isn't really sending out the signals to help your body ovulate and have a period, and so therefore you're not having a period, you're not ovulating, you're not going to be able to get pregnant, you're infertile. So it's just between our brain wavelengths. Wow, my brain wavelengths weren't working just then. It's really just a disconnect with your brain and signals and all the things, and it's because your body is under X amount of stress and it's kind of downregulated that system. So now, what can cause this? There are several things that can cause this. Many things that can cause this. So, one, eating too little. If you are under eating, this is a big stressor on the body. You are not supplying your body with enough vitamins and minerals and nutrients in general to support bodily functions. Your functions need a certain amount of calories to perform. Like, seriously, just breathing, your lungs inhaling and exhaling, take calories to function. So if you are not giving your body what it needs to function, it's not going to function. So eating too little is a big stressor on the body, which can cause this. If you are chronically under eating, if you are under eating for a long stretch of time and then that starts to build up, that's when you'll see issues with this. Two, if you're training too much, again, training is a stressor. When done properly, it's a good stressor. We want to exercise daily, but if you are, again, overtraining and doing too much for too long, that will have a compound effect that eventually will impact your cycle health and reproductive health. And so training too much, overtraining, is a really big cause of hypothalamic amenorrhea. I would say those are the two biggest stress pieces that can cause it. Eating too little, training too much, or a combination of both. Another reason is too low body fat percentage. This kind of goes hand in hand with the other two, eating too little or training too much. Usually you have lower body fat percentage because of those things. So when you have too low body fat percentage, your body cannot support, proper reproductive function, and so therefore you might fall into the hypothalamic amenorrhea stage. You do need certain amounts of body fat to have a healthy, normal cycle. We need like absolute minimum 17% body fat for proper reproductive function, and even more than that for regular healthy hormone function. So I would even argue up to like 21 to 23% body fat is going to be even better than 17. But as an absolute minimum, 17% has been shown to be a minimum for females, and this is why females need more body fat than males. We do have important functions going on that males do not. So we need to have proper body fat percentages. Another cause of this could be intermittent fasting. Now this one is kind of debatable, but if you are, again, this kind of goes hand in hand with eating too little. If you are intermittent fasting and therefore eating too little, that's going to be a cause. If you have really low carb diets, you're not getting enough nutrients through whole grains and proper carb consumption, this is going to be a problem. Your brain pretty much exclusively uses calories from carbs as its main source to function. So you definitely need to have carbs. I'm not saying have like a super high diet of carbs, but you need moderate amounts of carbs in your diet. So people with low carb diets can experience some of this as well. And it could be a combination of all of these things in general. There could be other stressors too that I'm not listing here. For example, if you're going through a divorce, that's very stressful. That can cause your reproductive function to slow down and therefore cause hypothalamic amenorrhea. So think of a time that you're really stressed. Maybe you have more acne show up. You have a lot of symptoms. I feel when I am chronically stressed, if there's like a big situation going on that is very stressful, usually you'll show some sort of symptoms, whether that's acne or irregular cycles or whatever, really big stressful events in your life can cause this as well. It might not be from eating too little or training too much or one of those things. It could just be from the impact of stress itself. But generally speaking, a lot of times when you are super stressed like that too, you might fall into also eating too little. And, you know, again, a combination of those things. So it could be one of these things, it could be a combination of these things. Generally speaking, you see hypothalamic amenorrhea caused from eating too little and training too much as the two major causes, but again, it could be other situations as well. And so when the body is low on available energy and doesn't have enough to go to functioning, kind of explained this already, but the body slows down the body systems that are not essential for life. So what is essential for our life? I mean, our heart beating, breathing, absorbing nutrients from our food, like that is something that's second nature in our body, just does that. These things that are essential to sustain life are the things that our body will prioritize most. So reproductive health, producing a baby, is not essential for our lives. That might seem like it's a really big part of your life. Yes, absolutely, but it is not essential to keep us living. We do not need to reproduce to live, essentially, is what I'm saying. So if you are not having enough available energy, your body is going to use the available energy that it does have to focus on the things that are essential for keeping us living. So one of those things that are not, essential for us to live is our reproductive system, our menstrual health, and digestion. Those are, again, another one. And they will not focus so much on that to conserve energy for the things that are absolutely necessary for us. And so this is where we got to check in with what is the cause. Are you eating too little? Are you overtraining too much? And is a lot of that available energy going towards your training? What is kind of the root cause here? And that's going to be like the first foremost step that you will want to work on is, what am I doing that's kind of causing this? So let's go over some signs and symptoms that you might experience, because you might not even know that you have hypothalamic amenorrhea before you even get told that. I had no idea that I necessarily had that until I was told that I had that. So one sign is that you're cold all the time. If you cannot get warm, if you're just literally cold all the time, that could be a sign. Vaginal dryness is a sign as well, which goes hand in hand with sign and symptom number 3, which is low libido or low sex drive. These things go all hand in hand. Again, our bodies are not thinking, hey, let's reproduce. It's thinking, I need to support my body and keep me living. So things dry up. Talking about vaginal dryness, right? And I think I don't even remember, but I think I just made a podcast episode on this, talking about cervical mucus. But basically, cervical mucus, or discharge, if you call it that, it fluctuates throughout our cycle. So we have more abundant cervical mucus around ovulation because that is our fertile window. So our bodies are like, hey, let's make more cervical mucus. Let's lubricate a little bit more, get you more in the mood to reproduce. And then it kind of weans off when you get your period, and it goes in this cycle. So when, again, we don't have the necessary available energy, these things aren't working as they should. So you're not having cycles of cervical mucus like that. It's more dry down there. Your body is not saying, hey, let's make a baby. It's like, hey, let's just keep you living. So you have more dryness, you have lower sex drive, you're not in the mood as much. These are all signs and symptoms. There are plenty other signs and symptoms as well, but these are some really important ones that you can note if they are different for you. And you might also be thinking, I should have said this probably in the beginning, but even if you don't want to get pregnant, let's say you're someone who doesn't want to have kids, you might be listening to this episode and you might be like, hey, why do I even need to ovulate? I don't want to have kids. I'm not trying to get pregnant, so why is this even important to me? Well, the importance of ovulating and making sure that we do have normal cycles is for way more than just reproductive health. So if you're experiencing hypothalamic amenorrhea and you're like, that's fine, I don't want to have kids, great, whatever, you're not thinking bigger picture. So I want you to think big picture here, because our reproductive health, our menstrual cycle, and having regular ovulatory phases does also help with things like bone health, hello, as we age, we need to have proper bone health. You'll be at risk for more fractures, broken bones, just more fragile as you age. So it helps with bone health. It helps with cardiovascular disease. So if you don't want to run into risk of more cardiovascular disease, you need to ovulate regularly. It can help with anxiety and depression. That has been linked to proper ovulation and less anxiety and depression. It also can help with early onset dementia. If you do not want to have dementia when you grow up, this is a really big part of that as well. So these things are all tied to ovulation. So even if you don't want to get pregnant, even if you don't want to have kids, you still need to ovulate. You still need to have a proper menstrual cycle for all of these things. It's not just, I'm ovulating to make a kid. I'm ovulating for my general health. Having a period is a sign of the health status of your body as a female. And if you're not having proper periods, ovulatory cycles, there is a problem and you need to get to the root cause. So even if you don't want to get pregnant, don't just say, oh, it's fine. I have hypothalamic amenorrhea, fine, I'm good, I don't want to have kids. It's not just because of that. So that's a side note, should have mentioned that earlier, but just kind of thinking that through too. Just keep in mind, it is not just for having kids. Anyway, moving forward. So if you are in the kind of group that you do want to have kids, or again, even if you don't want to have kids, how do you then regain your period? How do you get rid of HA, hypothalamic amenorrhea? You want to regain your period. Regaining your period is one of the for sure telltale signs that you are ovulating and you no longer have it. So there's a couple of things that we want to do here. As I mentioned, the top two things or two reasons why you probably get hypothalamic amenorrhea or HA is because of undereating and overtraining. So one of the biggest things that we want to do is correct a calorie deficit. If you are in a calorie deficit chronically for a long period of time, you're undereating for a long period of time, you need to correct that and get out of that calorie deficit. So first things first, have carbs at every single meal. Do not skip out on carbs. Do not just say carbs are the enemy. Carbs are not the enemy. You need carbs. You need to have carbs at every single meal. That's first thing. Second thing, eat enough to support maintenance. So on average for females of reproductive age, we need to have roughly like 2,200 calories. That's like an average calorie intake for maintenance for women at this age. Sounds crazy. I know. You're probably used to having 1,400 calories and you're like, how the hell am I supposed to have 2,200 calories? That doesn't even make sense. That is the average. It's just society that has taught us that we need to have less. And so now we're all used to having 1,400 or less calories in a day. That's not great. We need to have enough to support maintenance. Now that's not going to be 2,200 calories for everyone. Some people maintain at 1,800 calories, but I would say roughly 1,850 as an absolute minimum and upwards for maintenance. So you need to be eating enough to support your maintenance. And side note to this, like I had just said, you're probably used to eating a lot less, and especially for someone who does have hypothalamic amenorrhea, odds are you are under eating. So you might be thinking, okay, well, I'm so used to eating, not a lot. I'm used to eating just a little bit. How am I even supposed to eat more? I don't feel like I can eat more. I get really full really easily. My body's just not used to it. How do I even eat more? Let's talk about how you can eat more to help support maintenance and to regain your period. So first things first, fats. Fats are very helpful. Dietary fats are the most calorically dense macro. And what I mean by macro, I mean macronutrients. Macronutrients are the nutrients that give your body energy. So this includes protein, carbs, and fats. Those are our three macronutrients. So fats are the most calorically dense out of those three. Carbs and protein are both 4 calories per gram. Fats are 9 calories per gram. So definitely more calorically dense. Therefore, have more healthy fats because you'll probably just naturally have more calories in a day, which is going to be helpful. Also, fats are very important for our hormone production. So you should be having healthy fats, an increase in healthy fats in general anyway. But fats are definitely would be my number one. Try to incorporate more healthy fats in your diet. It's going to help you with calorie density. Number 2, calorie dense for low volume. So What I mean by this, and we talk about this a lot, I feel like when people are going into a deficit, like high volume foods, like salads are very high volume foods, and what I mean by that is basically it's low calories, but you can eat a lot of them. Vegetables are very low calorie, you can have a ton of vegetables and feel full, even for low calorie. We want to do the opposite here with eating more. We want to have calorie dense foods that are low volume. So for example, take an English muffin, right? I know they have a light English muffin out there. I think it's like 100 calories, right? And I don't know the macro breakdown of that, but it's 100 calories for an English muffin. You could have a bagel instead, and that's more like 260, 270 calories for not a ton more food volume. So making swaps like that are a little bit more calorically dense for low volume. They don't take up a lot of space in your stomach, but they're higher calorie foods. I would opt for those. That'll help you eat more. And I would say also temporarily cut down on fiber. Now, I generally talk about having more fiber in your diet for a lot of things. It's really healthy to have, X amount of fiber in a day. We want that. But if you're trying to eat more for a specific reason, especially for something like this, you might want to cut down on the fiber intake for a short period of time. Again, eventually you'll be able to increase your fiber, but having high fiber in your diet helps to keep you full. We don't want you to be super full if you're trying to eat more. So you might want to cut down on the high fiber foods for now, and it'll help you feel not as full, so you'll be able to eat more and not feel overly stuffed. So that's a temporary change. Again, fiber is great. It is very necessary to have in your diet, but for the time being, if you're trying to eat more, especially for a reason like this, cut back on that a little bit and it'll help you eat a little bit more because you won't be as full. So that is number one with nutrition. That's how I would say how to eat more. And a big thing is that we need to correct the calorie deficit and come out of a calorie deficit. Number two, to regaining your period goes hand in hand with, again, what I said is a most common cause, training. You need to have less volume with your training. So do not do any HIIT training. Any HIIT style training, F45, cycle classes, Soul Cycle, Orange Theory, circuit training on your own. Do not do HIIT training. That is high intensity. That is harder for your body to recover. It's higher stress on your body. We need to lower the volume of our training. And again, temporarily, you might need to really cut back on training and do like 1 to 2 training sessions a week. And I know, especially for, again, people who have hypothalamic amenorrhea, odds are one of the reasons you have it is because you're doing a lot of training. So this might be really scary for you, but it's a temporary change. You can always increase your training again later on when you're in a more healthy spot. So for example, for me, I was training, at the time that I had AJ, I was training a ton. Like I said, I was in college. I went to school to play soccer. So I had practice every single day for 2 hours, I think that was soccer practice. So it's not even like, I don't know, not to put baseball down, but like baseball, you don't really run around and stuff. I guess for practice you do, it's different. But anyway, soccer is a very intense sport. You are on your feet, you're running around pretty much the entire time. So I would have a 2-hour soccer practice. I would also have a team lift with my college team. So that was another, let's say, hour of a lift. And then on top of that, I was also doing my own things. So some days I would do an extra lift on my own for another hour. Sometimes I would do an extra run on my own. So that would be another like 45 minutes of running on top of what I was doing with my team. So I was training like 2-3 times a day for many days of the week. So I was severely overtraining. And then when I got told I had HA, they said, you gotta stop training. And I said, what? What do you mean? What do you mean I gotta cut back on my training? That is a lie. So it was scary. It was definitely hard. It's hard to hear those things, but it's the short-term sacrifice for the long-term benefit. It is so important to have a regular cycle, especially if you want to have kids. You need to get rid of that HA. So think about it. The pros outweigh the cons. The cons being I don't want to necessarily drop down on my training. The pros being I'm going to get my cycle back and have kids in the future. Hell yeah, I'm going to choose having kids in the future over training. So cut back on your training. You might need to drop down significantly depending on how much you were doing, what you were doing, but I would opt for having minimum of 3 days of rest, if not a little bit more. 4 days of rest days is even more ideal. But you might need even more than that. It really depends on the person, but you need to drop down the volume of your training, give yourself more and more rest time and less training time. And again, this is kind of more specific, so if you have questions on this in regards to training for yourself, send me a DM and I can go over that specifically and take a look at what your current training is and what I suggest you change in terms of that. Another thing that's really important with regaining a period is proper sleep. Sleep does impact your hormones.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Health Club with Julia podcast. If you loved the episode, share the podcast and tag me, and subscribe so you don't miss any further episodes. If you have any questions, feel free to send me a DM. Thanks for being a part of the club. See you next time.